in the Paris Commune, we can see a glimpse of how we can get rid of sexism, not just the little manifestations of sexism, if there is such a thing, not just the harassment and the discrimination and the violence, but to get rid of sexism root and branch, and to also get rid of those institutions of the state which exist not to defend us or keep us safe, but to oppress us and to keep us in our place. And the Paris Commune can give us a little roadmap of how we can do both of those things. And I think it's also fitting to celebrate the Commune, because for years and for decades, the British Labour movement always celebrated the Paris Commune. Every year, people would get together, wave their red flag, sing the Internationale, and remember those who were killed in the Commune, who were exiled by the Commune, and who, through their struggles, gave us all a glimpse of a better kind of world. And this is what Eleanor Marx wrote 5 years after the Commune. She said, "It's time people understood the true meaning of this revolution. This can be summed up in a few words. It was the first attempt of the working class to govern itself. The workers of Paris expressed this in their first manifesto when they declared that they understood it was their duty and their absolute right to render themselves masters of their own destiny by seizing governmental power." What a great manifesto to start with. But we are still, like Eleanor was back in 1876, still thinking of the true lessons of this revolution. It transfixed socialist Europe. It transfixed radicals, reformers and socialists all across Europe and the world, because to have a revolution in one of the major European capital cities was a complete shock and a complete inspiration. To look at a little tiny microcosm, the effect the Paris Commune had on the family of Karl Marx. We know that Jenny Marx and Eleanor went to Paris not to Paris, but to France in 1871 to try and help their sister escape from the repression. Laura Marx married Paul Lafarge, who was a communard. Jenny Marx married Charles Longuet, who was a communard. Eleanor Marx was engaged to, but didn't marry, Prosper Lesagre, and she translated his book. So they were immersed in it. They were teenage girls immersed in a revolution just across the channel and embracing the lessons of that revolution, both personally and politically. And the three things I want to talk about really are the joy, the creativity and the energy that revolution unleashed. And this is something you can read about in all kinds of big uprisings and revolutions, that sense of unity against the system, that sense of us discovering all sorts of powers that are latent in ourselves. Secondly, the question of democracy. The Paris Commune was born in a city almost destroyed by war, that had been besieged by the armies of Prussia, and yet it only survived for 72 days, and yet it managed to bring in a society far, far more democratic and answerable to people's needs than capitalist society has ever done. And the third thing is really the radical rethinking of the role of women in that society. So this is the clever bit where I'm going to try and share my screen. You never know, it might work. If not, I think I've got some technical. Can you see Eleanor Marx? Okay, so this is a revolutionary barricade thrown up in Paris. This is what the Parisian ruling classes wanted to stop when they completely remade Paris by the architect Haussmann, destroying. You can see people looking agog and aghast as Haussmann puts these huge boulevards through working class Paris, because they didn't want any more revolutions. They didn't want any Parisian workers to reach the centres of power. So our story starts on the 18th of March, 1871, when the sun rose over the working class districts of Montmartre and Belleville. The milkmaids, who were the first up delivering the milk, started ringing the bells, raising the alarm and awakening Paris, because soldiers sent by the French government of Adolphe Thiers were trying to take away the city's 250 cannon. The cannon was the only defence that the city had against the Prussian armies. The French government had surrendered to the Prussians, but the Parisians did not want to surrender, and they did not trust their own government to keep them safe or deliver them. The official government at Paris had fled from the Prussian armies and moved their government to Versailles, where it was safe. and yet they wanted to disarm Paris and leave the citizens of Paris, the workers of Paris, helpless in the face of the Prussian armies. So the troops were sent in, and in the great glorious moments that happen in revolutions, instead of turning their muskets on the workers, they turned them skywards, and actually at some points turned them against the generals who ordered them to fire. Instantly, as soon as these troops were around, women and children began to mingle with them, standing in front of them saying, will you shoot your mothers, your sisters, your wives, will you shoot your children? And a revolution was underway. General Lecomte ordered his troops to shoot the women, and they said, will you shoot us, your family, your class, your brethren? And refused. They refused, and they joined the revolution, and General Lecomte was himself arrested and later shot. So years of bitterness really exploded at this point. And one of the communards wrote this: legally, we had no more government, no police force or policemen, no magistrates or trials, no top officials or prefects. The landlords had all run away. There were no soldiers or generals, no letters or telegrams, no tax collectors, no more academy or institute. Paris, immense Paris, was abandoned to the, quote, orgies of the vile multitudes. But of course, the vile multitudes didn't riot, launch a robbing spree, set upon each other with violence. Instead, they set out to create the most democratic world society we've ever seen in Europe, a society with women at the centre of it. The government of the people, by the people, without monarchy, without church, without police, without army or the courts, with all the rich, powerful officials, with all their medals and insignias, were all cowering in Versailles, where in Paris, a newly elected government took over and got rid of the army. Karl Marx wrote this: for the first time since the days of February 1848, another great revolution, the streets of Paris are safe, police of any kind. We, said a member of the Commune, hear no longer of assassination, of theft, or of personal assault. It seems as if the police had dragged along with it to Versailles all of its conservative friends. Almost seemed as if with no police there was less crime. Who would have thought it? So women took part in this great explosion of democracy, which felt like a festival. Here is the crowd burning the guillotine, that great symbol of horrible state corporal power, burning it down to cheering mobs. Here is the statue of Napoleon, dragged down, because we love toppling statues when they represent imperial oppression. The man next to it there is Gustave Courbet, one of the great French painters of the time, who led the pulling down of the statue. This was pulled down in the Place de Vendôme. So some of the most significant political organisations involved women. Women were in the crowds, but they weren't just in the crowds, they were also organising politically. Louise Michelle, people may have heard of, the most famous woman of the Commune, but also Elizabeth Dimitrieff and some women we'll meet later. They inserted themselves at the heart of all the Commune's great achievements. Democracy. For the first time, officials were instantly recallable. So if they did something you didn't like, you could get rid of them straight away. There was no waiting 5 years to see what would happen. Education was secular. They dragged it out and they kicked out the priests and the nuns. It was for boys and girls, and they said, we do not recognise the division between mental and manual labour. We will develop the mind and the body equally to develop the whole human being, something we are still aspiring to as a teacher in 2021. Art. They followed a policy of communal luxury, which meant extending art into everyday life. Luxury not as a selfish pursuit of personal wealth, but as public art, demanding that beauty flourished in social spaces and that art was indispensable to the whole community. And they brought in ended night working and brought in cooperatives. And this depended on women's organisation. Let me just get on to my next slide. Here are the women of the Commune celebrating their initial victories. This is Elizabeth Dimitrieff, who was central to setting up the Union of Women. they declared, the Labour committee of the Commune declared that all the workshops whose owners had fled to Versailles could be passed over to a cooperative association of workers, because they believed this was a way to transform labour by introducing equal pay, shorter working hours and workers' control. The man in charge said this, Leo Frankel: "The people created its own political organism as a means of realising the very aim of the revolution, that is, the emancipation of labour, the abolition of monarchy, of monopolies, privileges, bureaucracy and speculative capitalist and industrial feudalism." Not bad. And she was at the heart of this. Now, the question of women, people will often say, well, the Commune didn't give women the vote. And this is true. I would say that in 72 days, they didn't really get time to overthrow the institutions and attitudes that had been so deeply ingrained for decades. And women played a vital role. And the Commune did lots and lots of reforms that benefited women's lives. So they got rid of pawn shops, they got rid of evictions, they got rid of the difference of unmarried partners and married partners. They refused to recognise the difference between illegitimate and legitimate children. And they thought this was incredibly putting women on an equal status with that of men, which is what they wanted to do. So working class people showed they were capable of organising society more efficiently and fairly than the privileged politicians and bureaucrats they had replaced. But more than that, these communards wanted to build a socialist society. Elise Reclus, who'd been a feminist campaigner in the 1860s, said this: "The Commune set up for the future a bright new society in which there are no masters by birth or title or wealth, no slaves by origin, caste or salary. Everywhere the word commune was understood in its largest sense as referring to a new humanity made up of free and equal companions, oblivious to the existence of old boundaries, helping each other in peace from one end of the world to the other." Not a bad vision. So women were central to this as nurses, of course, but also as organisers, as activists and as soldiers. Elizabeth Dmitriev was Russian. She was exiled in Switzerland, where she joined the First International, an international of socialist organisations led by Karl Marx. She became their envoy to London. She hung out with Marx and Jenny Marx and Laura and Eleanor Marx, and he decided she should be the envoy to Paris during the Commune. She was 21 years old, and she was absolutely central to setting up the Union of Women. It provided staff for orphanages and care for old people. It recruited nurses, provided speakers for public meetings, asked for space in halls so they had nightly meetings of 3,000 to 4,000 women every night, this organisation. And it was central to reframing how labour was seen and attempting to bring in cooperatives. So this is Louise Michelle. I don't think she was in the Union of Women because she refused to recognise separate organisations for women. She demanded a right to lead any troop of soldiers or men. She wouldn't just stick to women's organisations. She presided over the Club of the Revolution during the Commune, and the clubs played a very important role in articulating the feelings of the population and letting the Commune know what they were talking about. She threw herself into the armed struggle against the French government. It was Louise Michelle who led the wing of the Commune who said, let's march on Versailles, let's try and crush our enemies before they crush us. She said, I am a savage, all right, because people called her that. She said, I like the smell of gunpowder, grape shot flying through the air, but above all, I'm devoted to the revolution. And she never stopped for the rest of her life being devoted to the revolution. This is Natalie Lamal. In the 1860s, she was a strike leader, led a strike of bookbinders and fought for equal pay for women. She was also a member of the First International. She was at the Club of Freethinkers, where she argued for divorce and women's liberation, and she ran a cooperative restaurant. On the 21st of May, when they summoned the entire population to the. She was speaking at a meeting, and she stood up with a red flag in her hand and led the women out to the barricades to try and stop the government troops entering Paris. This is Paula Mink. That's her with Louise Michelle, a Polish socialist, a friend, again, a member of the First International and the Union of Women. She spent a lot of time touring the provinces outside Paris, trying to win support from all the cities, trying to really spread the revolution. And she was outside Paris when the government did enter and crush the Commune. So she survived, but a very interesting and very important to spread the revolution outside of the city. And this is Jack Clark, who was a Russian socialist. She edited a socialist paper called La Sociale. She was also a member of the First International and a friend of Marx, and she began a Russian translation of Marx's Capital, but never finished it, perhaps too busy trying to change the world. So the women's lives represent the possibility of revolution. They show how women can lead, women can organise within this wider context of revolution from below and of a different kind of democracy. These horrible pictures represent what absolutely did happen when that possibility was crushed, and the reality of Bloody Week, when the National Guard went in, sorry, not the National Guard, the government of Paris went in to crush the Commune, and the horrible vilification of women went on. Women were what they were called pétroleuses. They said the women were unsexed, were unhuman. Any working class woman in Paris could be rounded up, humiliated, raped, beaten, shot. They reckon that something like 20,000 people were summarily executed, and another 10,000 were deported in a kind of orgy of violence. This is a picture of the women of the Commune waiting to be deported. In a little afternote, this guy, this photographer, he faked his pictures, but anyway. And this is Gustave Courbet's picture of prisoners after the Commune, which he painted to show how young the kids were who ended up in prison. So I'm running out of time. Let's see if I can come back to you. That's it. So let's stop sharing. So the Bloody Week was horrible. The people who had stood for such a peaceful and fantastic society, such a democratic society, were, as I say, rounded up and shot. The fascinating thing is, despite the real brutality and the vengeance and the revenge that was heaped upon the communards of both sexes by those who felt that their power and status was so threatened, the flame was never extinguished. And the women I've talked about tonight, particularly Natalie Lamal and Louise Michelle, when they died years later, tens of thousands of people turned up for their funerals because they became living symbols of this different society, a society based on democracy, not voting once every 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years, but on having a real say, because democracy is only real if you can actually change your life, if you can bring about real reforms, if you can have education and healthcare and equality and freedom and work and all the things that the communards, all the things that they fought for. So to sum up, as I think I probably must, when catastrophe faces us, we don't look to those at the top to get us out of the mess that they've put us into. We look to those around us. We look to our working class brothers and sisters, because we know that inside each and every one of us is all this capacity to organise, to think differently, to organise cooperatively. The police don't keep us safe on the streets. We keep us safe on the streets, and they keep us down. They stand in to defend that state structure that the communards replaced so absolutely fantastic. There was nobody to bury the dead in Paris, nobody to carry letters, but the workers rose to the occasion. They not only fulfilled the bureaucratic functions of the state, they got rid of all the repressive functions, and they built a society for just for 72 days, showed us that art, that creativity, that different ways of living our personal lives, All of these things are within our grasp when we fight collectively against the system. And the deeper our struggle, the greater the changes. And when we can have a revolution, and surely we must have a revolution at some point, then we will stand on the shoulders of those communards who fought to spread that revolution, who argued in their clubs for women's liberation and a different way of living, because socialists were absolutely at the heart of the commune, and the commune gives us a glimpse of what we're all capable of.